Hey guys, I'm finally doing a tutorial about color. It is going to be a few different videos. I have done several videos talking about color, but I have not done any with any visual aid, so I am finally going to do that. I am doing several in-depth kind of videos about color, and today I am starting with some basic terms. I get asked a lot about what different terms mean, like value or hue, so I'm going to talk about them and let you guys know what the heck those things mean, because they're very important when you're doing critique and understanding art. I'm also doing this from the perspective of a digital artist. I'm specifically going to talk about like how to achieve some of these terms through, say, Photoshop and Clip Studio Paint. So all this in mind, let's get into color terms. Also, do you like my graphic design? I spend a lot of time at work making pretty presentations, so I decided not to make a pretty one today. To begin, let's talk about the color wheel. You guys have probably seen this a lot. You learn about it when you're like in elementary school, where, you know, your teachers were teaching you all about paint, mixing colors and stuff. They probably brought out the color wheel. You've probably all seen it, but it's really good to go over it. I remember when I was in high school, and my teacher was teaching us all about color and mixing colors, and she brought out the color wheel, and I remember literally rolling my eyes and going, I already know this stuff, this is super easy, but I didn't really take it to heart until I actually had to sit down and learn how to color things. So it's always good to go back to your basics, they're very important. Let's get into it. The color wheel is broken down into several groups. Again, you've probably already heard this stuff before, but to start off, there's the primary colors. Every single other color on the color wheel is based off of these: red, yellow, and blue. You can make all the other colors using these, but you cannot make these colors out of any of the other ones on the wheel. These are your base colors. Then there's your secondary colors. You get them from mixing primary colors. For example, red and blue makes purple, red and yellow makes orange, blue and yellow makes green. I'm sure you've already heard this before. Basic color mixing stuff. Then there's your tertiary colors, which I remember I didn't really hear about these until I was in high school doing an art program, but they are very important, especially when you're describing specific colors to people. Tertiary colors are mixed from a primary and a secondary color. So for example, mixing purple and red, you get red, purple, etc. And a lot of these tertiary colors will have fancy names. For example, you know, there's indigo or lime green or turquoise. But when you can't think of the perfect name for one of these colors, or some people might have different ideas of what like a teal or a turquoise looks like, you can always refer to it as blue-green and get the idea across. Another important thing to know about the color wheel is that colors have different temperatures to them. For example, colors like red, yellow, and orange, they are warm colors, meaning they feel warm. And blue, purple, and green feel cool. So as you can see on the right side, the blue is a cool color, the orange is a warm color. I'm sure you have all heard this before. However, it is interesting to note that two colors that are the same hue, meaning like two purples, one can be cool and one can be warm. As you can see on the right, the two purples at the bottom, one is a more blue purple, which makes it a lot more of a cool colored purple, and then there is the red purple, which it feels a lot warmer in comparison to the other purple. So in relationship to each other, colors can have different temperatures. I won't get too much more into this in this video, because it's easier to explain when I'm talking about color relativity. That is a whole other video compared to this. Main takeaway from this is cool versus warm, and a cool color can still feel warm, and a warm color can still feel cool. That makes sense? I hope so. Okay. Now that you understand the basic concept of how colors are made, let's get into the nitty-gritty of hue, value, and saturation. I get the most questions about these. I didn't run into them until I started studying art, so if you haven't run into them, that's fine. No shame, man. But they're very important to when you are learning how to color things. They're important for when you're choosing palettes. They basically make up all your color choices. So let's start off with hue. Hue is the easiest to explain because it is literally the color wheel in Clip Studio and Paint. In fact, it is actually a wheel. In Photoshop, it's an up and down slider, but it's still the same concept. It's like a rainbow of different colors. Hue stands alone from value and saturation, which will become clear as I explain the different terms. So, to understand hue a bit better, if you look at the two blues on the left, they are the exact same color blue, but one is lighter and one is darker. Versus a different hue, which would be the pink. Those two pinks, they are the same hue. One is a light pink, one is a dark pink, but the blue and the pink are different hues. Does that make sense? You can have two colors that look very different that are the same hue, just depending on how light or dark or saturated they are. So moving on to saturation. This one is a little bit more complicated. Not too complicated. These are all simple concepts once you start to get them. But I remember before I knew about these, I totally confused. Anyways, saturation. So saturation refers to the dullness or vividness of a color. So a really desaturated color would be like grays or blacks or white, and really saturated are, think of like the brightest, richest colors you can think of. If you're thinking about like when you're printing, saturated would be like a sheet of paper that is just like drenched in ink. Now the way saturation is displayed in Clip Studio and Photoshop, it's displayed horizontally on the color picker, as you can see on the right there. On the left, everything is very gray and desaturated, where everything on the right is very bright and saturated. Even as it gets into like darker values, down at the bottom, if you are on the right, it is still very rich and full of color, whereas on the left, it is very dull and gray. Now if you look at these, the top three rectangles, they are all the same hue, but they are different saturations. So on the right, you see that blue is fully saturated. In the middle, it is a little more desaturated, and on the far side, it is nearly gray. It is like almost fully desaturated to a gray. And same goes for the three rectangles at the bottom. They are all the same hue of pink, but they have been desaturated as it goes toward the left. So there you go, that is saturation. Now let's get into value. So value refers to how light or dark a color is, regardless of hue or saturation. In Clip Studio and Photoshop, it is displayed vertically on the color picker. Sometimes value is also referred to like the brightness or lightness. Especially looking at Photoshop, I think it is referred to as lightness. But when you're looking at the color picker, the top is light and the bottom is dark. And like I said, this is regardless of saturation. So for example, you know, white is a very light value, or black is the darkest value, but you can also have a super saturated red that is a very light value, or a very fully saturated red that is like a very dark value, if that makes sense. So to give you an example of value, the colors on the left are very light, the colors on the right are dark. The three rectangles at the top, they are the same hue of blue, just with different values, and the pinks are the same hue of pink, just at different values. I had a little trouble getting the saturation to all be the same, so the saturation is definitely affected in the value, but sometimes that'll happen when you're changing the value of a color. Now, when you are looking at that color picker in Photoshop or Clip Studio, it may look like in order to get a very dark color, you need to add black, and in order to get a very light color, you want to add white. However, that's not always the best solution. Adding white to a color is referred to as tinting, and adding black to a color is referred to as shading. That is why a lot of the time when you refer to, a lot of the time our teachers will get mad at you for saying shading when you're referring to like adding shadow onto like an object in a picture, because shading just refers to adding black. It doesn't refer to like rendering a picture in light and shadow. So there you go. That's why they're mad at you. Usually when you're talking about shading a picture, you're talking about like adding different values to a picture. Anyways, I digress. Shading. Adding black. Tinting is adding white. However, when you are actually coloring, again, I'll get more into this when I do a video about color relativity, you may not want to only make dark values by adding black and only making light values by adding white. It tends to make your colors very desaturated, because white is naturally desaturated and black is naturally desaturated. So when you're choosing, say, a color that you want to be darker, say you're using it as a shadow on someone or something, you may want to use a different hue entirely. So in the top example on the right, you can see I've only added white to the middle blue there and only added black to the middle blue there. And if you look at the 3 squares below that, in order to get a darker value, I have added purple to the blue, which makes it a lot more saturated, a lot more rich, but it still feels darker than the original blue. And to get a lighter value, I tried adding green and desaturating it a little bit to get a lighter value. But they do still feel like the same blue. So when you are coloring a piece, you may want to look into using different hues instead of only relying on black and white to add light and shadow to your work. Anyways, this is a whole other video entirely. So now that you know about hue, saturation, and value, you may feel overwhelmed. However, the tool I use to really explore this stuff is the Hue Saturation Brightness Panel. It is the same in Clip Studio and in Photoshop. If you use Control U or Command U, it will bring up the menu. You can mess around with different sliders of saturation, hue, and brightness. And you can look at one color in your digital piece and just change all those different sliders, try out a whole bunch of different colors. Because I find when I look at just the color picker in Photoshop and Clip Studio, it feels very overwhelming to see all of the saturations and values to choose from. But when I only have a nice little slider, it's a lot easier to wrap my head around all these different factors that go into picking a color. So, I hope that helps, my friends. I talked a lot about color relativity. I'm going to leave this for another video, probably next month or the month after. Who knows? I don't know when the next one will come out, but I'll talk about it because there's a lot to color relativity and it would make a very long video to go over it all, and I don't want to overwhelm someone who's new to this subject, so I'll leave it to next time. It's gonna mess with you. Color relativity was the hardest thing for me to learn. But now that you know hue, saturation, and value, you have all the tools you need to make some really nice colors. And in future videos, I'll talk more about how to use these wonderful building blocks to make beautiful colored pieces. Heck yeah. Okay, that's all I got, friends. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was informative. I hope you learned something. Please let me know if I've messed something up. I will correct it in future videos, probably. What else do I talk about? Go check out our store. There aren't any fancy sales in it right now, but we are selling all our comics on our store, our Etsy store. Go check it out. Bones is very hyped about packing orders and sending them to people, and so am I. So go check them out, especially Scourge of 9 Point, because that was like my first comic where I actually understood color and painting, so go buy the Scourge of 9 Point. Follow me on my journey of learning how to color things. Okay. That's all I got. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe if you are cool. Okay, goodbye.